Welcome to a series where we talk about the World Cup histories of each nation at the 2026 World Cup. Today we'll be talking about the team with the most extreme disparity between accomplishments on the continental scale and appearances on the world stage. Egypt is consistently one of the most terrifying teams in Africa and the AFCON, a reputation that has continued in recent years thanks to the presence of one of the greatest players in the world, and yet the Pharaohs have only made a handful of appearances and haven't really done anything well here. Let's dive into this very odd history. Egypt is in a spot basically no other team in Africa was when the World Cup began its long history at Uruguay 1930. Egypt was actually independent and was a member of FIFA. Egypt could send a team to Uruguay 1930, and they tried to. A scheduling mix-up led to their team not making it onto the boat that would take them through the Mediterranean, across the Atlantic, into the great South American country of Uruguay. The very first World Cup would not be graced with the presence of the Pharaohs. For Italy 1934, Egypt just had to win a playoff against Palestine British Mandate. Don't be fooled by the name, this is just Israel. And Egypt won 7-1 and then 4-1 to easily qualify to the World Cup for the very first time, where they would be bracketed against Hungary in the round of 16. In this game, Hungary took a 2-0 lead pretty early, but a brace from Abdurrahman Fauzi evened it up by halftime. Egypt was competitive in this game, but Hungary would score 2 goals on the other side of halftime to take the game, final score 4-2. Egypt put up a good effort, but was knocked out of their first World Cup. Still, good run, I guess. It's going to be the first of many appearances, though, I'm sure. Qualifying for France 1938 saw Egypt matched up against Romania with the winner going through, and Egypt refused to play the first leg in December, so FIFA just gave the spot to Romania. With World War II coming and knocking out the next 2 World Cups along with tens of millions of lives, Egypt would not attempt qualification for Brazil 1950. That puts us at Switzerland 1954, where Egypt would have to beat Italy in order to reach the tournament. They did not beat Italy, losing 2-1 at home and then getting blasted 5-1 in Milan. Egypt would withdraw from qualification for both Sweden 1958 and Chile 1962 before either campaign started, and then they were part of the African boycott at England 1966. With Egypt also not entering qualification for Mexico 1970, we're already at 4 decades since the Pharaohs have graced the World Cup. For West Germany 1974, Egypt would finally partake in qualifying, and their first step was a playoff against Tunisia. They won at home 2-1, but a 2-0 loss in Tunis would end their campaign then and there. Their campaign for Argentina 1978 lasted slightly longer. They started with a playoff against Ethiopia, and this time they won both legs, luckily, to advance no problem. Their next playoff was against Kenya, and this was super exciting. The Nairobi leg finished 0-0, and Egypt was able to come back home and wrap up a 1-0 win to shithouse and advance again. The final playoff to reach the last round put Egypt against Zambia, and once again Egypt won this easily to become one of 3 teams competing for Africa's spot in the World Cup, alongside Nigeria and Tunisia. Egypt started this double round robin by getting rocked in Lagos, losing 4-0 but getting revenge in Cairo with a 3-1 win. After beating Tunisia 3-2 in the third game, this put Egypt in a spot where they could qualify with just a draw. With their first World Cup in nearly half a century on the line, Egypt got murdered 4-1 and Tunisia would qualify instead. Spania 1982 qualifying, Egypt's journey begins against Ghana, a really tough matchup if they actually had to play it. Luckily for the Pharaohs, Ghana would withdraw and they would get a bite at the second round for a playoff against Libya. This is a manageable playoff. Libya barely beat the Gambia to get here, but then Libya withdrew and Egypt made it to the third round without kicking a ball. Here they would run into the ferocious defense of Morocco, and they finally fell, losing 1-0 in Casablanca and blanking out 0-0 in Cairo. It's now been over 50 years since Egypt has made a World Cup, going into qualifying for Mexico 1986, and they would attempt to break that duck starting with a playoff against Zimbabwe. Egypt would squeak a 1-0 at home, and they would take a draw in Harare to win the tie, moving them on to the second round against Madagascar. This looks like a super manageable draw, but nope. A 1-0 win in Cairo was followed by a 1-0 loss in Antananarivo, and so that second game would go to extra time and eventually penalties. But the Pharaohs would banish the Malagasy to the Shadow Realm and Pens to just barely advance again, where once again they would run into the ferocious defense of Morocco, and they finally fell, drawing 0-0 in Cairo and then losing 2-0 in Casablanca. We've made it to qualifying for Italia 90, and this time CAF was kind enough to give Egypt a bye into the second round. In this round, Egypt would be grouped with Kenya, Liberia, and Malawi, with the winner moving on to one final playoff. This should have been free, but Egypt really struggled here. They would win their first game at home against George Weah's Liberia, but then they drew in the long way against Malawi, drew 0-0 in Nairobi against Kenya, then lost to Monrovia against Liberia. Egypt's poor performance on the road left them in second place in the table with 2 games left. But luckily they could not have asked for better results, winning both their final games and seeing Liberia only take 1 point in those same games. So that meant Egypt won the group by 2 games to move on to one final win-or-die playoff, and it's against Algeria. These countries do not like each other. As an American, it's not really my place to delve too deeply into the subject considering my ignorance, but this rivalry will end up permeating this 2-legged football playoff, and this isn't the last time this happens. This first game in Constantine, Algeria finished 0-0, and this put everything on the leg in Cairo, swinging the advantage to the underdog Egyptians. They were playing against an Algeria team that had been in the previous 2 World Cups and had just finished 3rd place at the most recent AFCon. This Cairo leg here is one of the most infamous qualifying games in World Cup history. It rightfully earned the title of Hate Game. The partisan Egyptians were rowdy and the action on the pitch was rough, but an early goal from Hassam Hassan would clinch Egypt's spot in the World Cup with a 1-0 win. After the match is where the most controversial incident happened, with an eye injury to an Egyptian supporter being blamed on Algerian superstar Lakhdar Belloumi, and yeah, I would say Hate Game is pretty fair for this. So yeah, Egypt is going to the World Cup for the first time since the Great Depression, and their reward is more depression. Italia 90. Imagine waiting over half a century to make it back to the World Cup, and you make it to fucking Italia 90. So depressing. I'm not trying to be a hater. I wasn't even born yet, but what a shit tournament. People talk shit about South Africa 2010. That was my first World Cup, so I'll always be nostalgic for that, but this is what a shit tournament looks like. If you want a great example of why I believe this, let's look at Egypt's journey through the tournament. Egypt would draw an all-European field, getting put in a group with England, Ireland, and the Netherlands, and this is tough. 2 arguably world-class sides here, and England, my kid of course, but Egypt had to be upset about this. Their first game came against the European champions, the Netherlands, and the Egyptians pulled a bit of a surprise. They were the better team throughout the game, and it took a moment of brilliance from Marco van Basten to get the Dutch their goal in the 58th minute. Once again, Egypt battled until they found their equalizer when Hassam Hassan won a penalty, and Magdi Abdelghani converted to get Egypt a point in their first game back. This was a credible point to earn, and the Pharaohs could legitimately feel hard done not to have won this. The Dutch keeper was on one, and at the end of the day, probably kept his team in the tournament with this performance. Game 2 for Egypt is against Ireland. It's the mummies versus the leprechauns, and this match was not as fantastical as those creatures. Egypt basically did nothing all game. Ireland did a lot of attacking, but didn't accomplish anything, and both teams split the points with a 0-0 draw. This left all 4 teams tied on points, tied on goal difference, tied on goals scored after 2 games, putting everything on Egypt's last game against England. It's the alien-made structures derby, Stonehenge versus the pyramids, the great archaeologist battle. It's Egypt versus England. 3 Lions dominated this game throughout the first half, but Egypt was able to keep them out of goal until the 58th minute when a great free kick from Paul Gascoigne found Mark Wright for the free header and the opening goal for England. Pharaohs battled back though, getting opportunities after this and being denied by the defense and Peter Shilton in goal. England held on for the win, the only win anyone would manage in this godforsaken group, and poor Egypt was eliminated in last place despite 2 credible draws and a fiery 1-0 loss. Egypt proved themselves more than capable in their return to the world stage, and next time they make it, they'll be more than ready to take the next step and reach the knockout rounds. It's USA 94 time, and Egypt will be drawn into a group with Angola, Togo, and Zimbabwe. As the big favorites in this group, Egypt would win their first 2 games before being upset in Harare by the Zim Warriors. A 0-0 draw in Luanda didn't help things either, and this put Egypt in a position where they had to beat Zimbabwe in the last game in Cairo or they wouldn't be moving on. The Warriors would score immediately, but Egypt hit back for 2 before the end of the first half and would win 2-1 to top the group on goal difference. Except, the Egyptian fans had been a bit naughty and did a little bit too much throwing shit and hitting Zimbabwean players with missiles. You can't do that. Zimbabwe would appeal for a replay and they'd get their wish, playing out a 0-0 draw in neutral Lyon to officially win the group ahead of Egypt in some crazy circumstances. France 1998 gives Africa 5 spots at the World Cup, and now this is wide open. Egypt's gonna make it every time. They get drawn into a group with Tunisia, Liberia, and Namibia, with the winner advancing directly to the World Cup, and this is as simple as things have ever been. The Pharaohs cast a 7 spell on Namibia, with 3 different dudes named Hassan scoring against the Brave Warriors. Unfortunately, they would lose 1-0 in Tunis, setting them behind. In their next game, a neutral site in Accra against Liberia, Egypt would go behind early on a goal from George Weah, and they weren't able to find an equalizer. Egypt was hopelessly behind Tunisia, needing a win in their 5th game against them, and then a win in their final game, and a miracle Namibia win against the Carthage Eagles. A 0-0 draw against Tunisia and Cairo ended things then and there, eliminating Egypt from contention. Korea-Japan 2002, it's time to make things right. After beating Mauritius in a playoff, Egypt would get drawn into the most diabolical group imaginable. Algeria, Morocco, Senegal, and the Brave Warriors of Namibia, who, just in case you were wondering, they were not able to get that one against Tunisia in the last campaign, so nothing was for anything. Anyway, here, 2 0-0 draws and a 1-1 draw in Windhoek against fucking Namibia. Did not indicate that Egypt was going to even have a chance here, but actually they went on a run after this. 5-2 at home against Algeria is a great result, and then beating Senegal at home was huge for their chances. A loss in Rabat after that was pretty tough to take, and even beating Namibia 8-2 after that wasn't really enough. That was, that kind of killed their momentum. Now, what did help was actually Senegal pulling a huge 1-0 upset win over Morocco, who was about to run away with this group. Instead, Morocco was done at 15 points going into the final match day, and both Senegal were on 12 points playing road games to end the groups. Egypt had the best goal difference and thus the advantage heading into their spot in Annaba, Algeria. Oh wow, would you look at that? Egypt was playing a game with the spot of the World Cup on the line and they're playing Algeria again. That's amazing. The Fennecs were adrift in 4th place and truly only playing for pride here, but play for pride they fucking did. With another extremely intimidating crowd that stoned their bus, Algeria was played to a 1-1 draw that would ensure they would not be making the trip out to East Asia to play in the 2002 World Cup. Egypt was supposed to be a regular by now, and it hasn't happened. Now we're going into the absolute hell that was the 2006 CAF qualifiers. Egypt would get a tough draw, getting Cameroon and Cote d'Ivoire, along with Benin, Libya, and Sudan. This is tough, and only the winner gets through. A home loss against Cote d'Ivoire in the second game put Egypt behind the 8 ball from the start, and a draw against Benin after this was disastrous. A win against Cameroon was nice, but after losing in Tripoli, Egypt sat in 4th place halfway through the campaign. They were behind frickin' Libya. They did beat them, and they also beat Sudan, and that combined with Cote d'Ivoire taking a draw in Tripoli, got Egypt to the point where they could beat the Ivorians in Game 8, and they would rejoin the race for the top. Instead, a brace from Didier Drogba would sink Egypt, putting them too far behind to catch either the Ivorians or Cameroonians. So with 2 games left to play, Egypt was once again eliminated from World Cup contention. It's now South Africa 2010, and Egypt has become the superpower of the continent. They won the 2006 AFCON on penalties against Cote d'Ivoire to slightly make up for missing the 2006 World Cup. They then went back-to-back by winning the 2008 AFCON 1-0 over Cameroon. The back-to-back African champions would begin their World Cup qualifying campaign in a group with DR Congo, Malawi, and Djibouti, with the winner and potentially runner-up both advancing to the final groups. Here, Egypt was shocked by Malawi in the 3rd group game, but otherwise swept it, finishing with 15 points of 18 to win the group and advance to the final group stage. In this round, Egypt would be grouped with Rwanda, Zambia, and Algeria. The Pharaohs would be 100% the favorites to reach the World Cup out of this group, but with Algeria here, you knew things were going to get at least a little bit interesting, and, well, yeah. This campaign started out with a really bad result, a 1-1 draw at home against Zambia. Then we got Egypt versus Algeria round 1 in Blida, and from all accounts this was a relatively normal, even-keeled game of football without people's buses being stoned. Algeria scored 3 second-half goals and took home a crucial 3-1 win to give themselves a big advantage in the group. Egypt would respond by winning their next 3 matches, setting up a winner-take-all game with Algeria. A draw or Algerian win meant the Fennecs were going to the World Cup for the first time since the 80s. If Egypt were to start blasting them in Cairo, though, by 3 or more goals, then it was the 2-time African champs who would be going through for the first time since 1990. So, of course, Egypt won by 2. Shit. Egypt and Algeria were tied on 13 points, a +5 goal difference, a split head-to-head series, and they both had scored exactly 9 goals. We had to go to a playoff. The lead up to the game in Egypt was tense, hostile, whatever negative words you want to use. It was 1989 and then some. There was some controversy before the game, and there was plenty of carnage after the game. This playoff would take place in neutral Sudan, and that did not stop for this match from also being extremely controversial. I can't even really get into everything here. This set of 3 games really could get its own deep dive video, but it's all kinds of he said, she said nonsense. What matters for our purposes here is the actual game. This one started with Egypt holding most of the possession and Algeria choosing to play the counter game. In the 40th minute, this was the result in Algeria getting a goal out of nowhere on a great finish from Antar Yahya. The Fennec defense would put the clamps on in the second half, and Algeria would hold on for the 1-0 victory. A huge upset and just total devastation for Egypt. This was the best team on the continent. They'd just proven it 2 tournaments in a row, and in early 2010, they'd do it a 3rd time by winning a 3rd consecutive AFCON. This is crazy. Algeria was now on their own World Cup adventure, and Egypt was one of a few very good teams not present at Africa's first World Cup. Let's move on to Brazil 2014 qualifying, where Egypt would begin in a group with Guinea, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique. The winner of this group would move on to a playoff for a spot in the World Cup, so this is manageable. Pharaohs would be held by the breakout of a young star by the name of Mohamed Salah. He would score 6 goals in these 6 group games, including a late winner in Conakry to beat Guinea, a hat-trick in Harare to help beat Zimbabwe, and the only goal scored in Maputo to beat Mozambique. Egypt would win 6 of 6 here and had the group locked up with a game to spare. This got them to the playoffs, where all they had to do was beat Ghana in a playoff. Ghana was a good team coming off their great quarterfinals run in the 2010 World Cup, but this was still a good Egypt team, right? Well, the Pharaohs would go to Kumasi and get turned into mummies. 6-1 the final score. An unbelievable beatdown at the hands of the Black Stars. It literally didn't matter what happened in the Cairo leg, and Egypt won, by the way. It didn't matter. Ghana was through to the World Cup again, and Egypt's drought now reaches a quarter of a century. It's on to Russia 2018 now, where Mo Salah is going to grow from a guy that couldn't get a game at Chelsea into a global superstar. This journey begins with a playoff against Chad, and fucking Chad won the first game. They won 1-0 at home. But in the return leg in Alexandria, the Pharaohs came back to life, scoring 4 goals and saving the country from international embarrassment. This got them to the group stages, where all Egypt would have to do to reach the World Cup again would be to win a group with Uganda, the Republic of Congo, and their main competition, freaking Ghana again. Egypt would open this group with a 2-1 win at Brazzaville, but the big one was the second game, a match in Alexandria against the Black Stars of Ghana. Egypt would win this game 2-0, a crucial win in opening up a lead on their main competition. Yeah, then they lost in Kampala to Uganda. This was wild because Ghana actually drew at home with Congo in the other game. This meant that Egypt was now 4 points clear of Ghana halfway through this group, and yet they were in second place because they were looking up at Uganda. In the return leg in Alexandria, Egypt would beat Uganda 1-0 on an early goal from Mo Salah, and this would put them ahead for good. Egypt would beat Congo at home in the 5th game of this group, and Ghana would actually do the Pharaohs a solid, drawing 0-0 with Uganda to give Egypt the 4-point cushion at the top. This meant that with the game to spare, Egypt has finally made it back to the World Cup. If Egyptian soccer fans weren't delirious enough, their group draw was the best thing they could have asked for. The hosts, Russia, by far the weakest team in Pot 1, Saudi Arabia out of Asia, and Uruguay out of South America. No hates to the Uruguayans, this was a very good team with multiple generational players, but if they are the danger team in your group and you're competing with the unknown Russians and even more unknown Saudis for second place in the group, that's an amazing place to be. Look at the bullshit Iceland had to deal with in Group D with Argentina, Croatia, and Nigeria. It can be so much worse. Unfortunately, the quality of depth in the squad had gotten so much worse since the golden age of the AFCON three-peat, and that made this team so much more dependent on Mo Salah. It's important to stress that not only was the run-up to this World Cup an absolute shit show from the Egyptian FA, but Mo Salah was not fully fit coming into this World Cup, having just endured a very long season at Liverpool. Egypt would open their World Cup in Yekaterinburg against Uruguay, the favorites in the group, and Mo Salah was not playing. He was deemed not fit to start, and he was never subbed in because Egypt played this game very defensively. Negative football, no chances for either one of us. I remember being pissed that I woke up for this because we got damn near 90 minutes of scoreless football, but the occasional missed chance for Luis Suarez. Egypt created nothing, but they were happy to get out of there with a point. And then on a corner in the 89th minute, Jose Jimenez rose higher than everybody else and headed home for the winner. Uruguay won, Egypt 0 in the final, and Egypt's path to the knockouts just got a little bit harder. but their play was encouraging here, I do gotta say. Game 2 against the hosts in St. Petersburg, and this is for everything. If Egypt loses this, they're 1000% out. If they win, they're right back in the hunt with just the game against Saudi Arabia remaining. This is some anime type shit though, because with his team down in the depths, Mo Salah is in the starting 11. He's playing. This man is not going to stand by and watch his team get eliminated from the World Cup on the sidelines. Our hero goes up against a classic villain, the Russians. And while this game is cagey at first, Egypt will grow into the game and start getting the best opportunities. This isn't anime though. This is real life, and soccer is a fickle, brutal sport. Egypt would have an absolute calamity on defense just after halftime, with Russia scoring on an own goal by captain Ahmed Fatih, and this just broke the Pharaohs. Soon after, Mario Fernandes would find the gap in an Egyptian defense and find Denis Cheryshev in the box, who would make it 2-0. Just a few minutes after, in the 62nd minute, it was 3-0 when Artem Zuba transformed into prime Dennis Bergkamp and controlled a long pass perfectly, chesting it down, mugging Pharaoh defender Ali Gabr, and finishing past Mohamed El Shenawi for the back-breaking goal. Egypt would get a consolation goal when Salah earned and converted a penalty, and that at least ensured they wouldn't go home with 0 goals scored, but there was nothing after that. 3-1 the final in St. Petersburg, and Egypt are already eliminated from the World Cup. The final game against Saudi Arabia is a rubber match, with only pride, regional bragging rights, World Cup legacy, and third place in the group up for grabs. Those who chose to go to Volgograd to watch a meaningless World Cup game did at least get treated to a spectacle. Mo Salah would start again, and this time he hit the ground running, scoring a nice goal in the 22nd minute to give Egypt the lead. Incredibly, this was Egypt's first goal from open play in a World Cup since fucking 1934. That's almost a century. The Red Sox waited about that long for a World Series. Salah would have another amazing opportunity soon after, but would chip it wide, and after this, the Saudis took over. They won a penalty. Egypt's 45-year-old keeper Assam El Hadari made an amazing save. Then the Saudis won a second penalty, and this time El Hadari was beaten by Salman Al Faraj to level the game going into halftime. The second half was dominated by the Green Falcons, and the story really became Al Hadari willing his team forward with several critical saves. But in stoppage time, all was made for nothing when Salam Al Dawsari won it at the deaths for the Saudis. Egypt would exit the tournament with 0 points, 2 goals scored, and almost certainly the worst team at the 2018 World Cup. There were people that said they were going to get out of this group. Bro, I know I'm talking about Egypt, but I don't need you in the video. Time marches forward, and Egypt would attempt to qualify for the first World Cup held in the Arab world, Qatar 2022. To do so, they'd need to win both a group and a playoff, and their group draw landed them in a group with Gabon, Angola, and Libya. This isn't an amazing draw. Gabon was pretty good and had one of the great danger men in the world, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. Still, this was manageable for Egypt. They drew at Gabon but won at home against Angola, and more importantly, won home and away against Libya. Gabon kind of dropped the ball here, so Libya had become the danger team, and these 2 wins basically wrapped up the group for Egypt. They would draw in Luanda, and after that, Egypt was through to the African playoffs. Unfortunately for the Pharaohs, they would draw the reigning AFCON champions and arguably the best team on the continent at the time, Senegal. This playoff would be deadlocked at 1-1 after 180 minutes, with both games holding up mirrors to each other. Egypt would win 1-0 in Cairo on a 4th-minute Senegalese own goal, and the Teranga Lions would match this with a 3rd-minute goal from Boulaye Dia. With the match completely tied after 180 minutes, later 210 after extra time, this playoff would go to a penalty shootout for a bid for the World Cup. Egypt's especially negative tactics during this entire tie would come back to bite them when Salah would miss his penalty, Zizo would do the same right after, and Mustafa also missed a penalty on Egypt's 4th attempt, and that was the death knell. Sadio Mane stepped up, hit his penalty to put Senegal into a World Cup that Mane would unfortunately not play in, and he knocked his Liverpool teammate Mo Salah out along with the rest of the Egyptian national team. I gotta say, ball didn't lie here. The right team went through, but Egypt continues to have just like horrible luck in World Cup qualifiers. I don't know how they do it. Some good news finally came Egypt's way for North America 2026 with the expansion of the tournament to 48 teams. Africa going from 5 bids to 9 or 10 depending on playoff results. Egypt is now firmly in the territory of this country should always be in the World Cup, but they were probably already there. And so now their first attempt here has them in a group with Burkina Faso, Guinea-Bissau, Sierra Leone, Ethiopia, and Djibouti. And my first thought when seeing this group was, holy shit, there's literally Zero reason why Egypt shouldn't win this group. Zero. Burkina Faso has a decent team. I love Django Ouattara and Edmond Tapsoba as much as the next guy, but come on now. In this group, Egypt will win 4 of their first 5 games, only drawing in Bissau, and on 13 points they were already coasting, being 5 points ahead of second place Burkina Faso and Sierra Leone. Wins at home against Sierra Leone and Ethiopia put Egypt on 19, still 5 points ahead of Burkina Faso with a trip to Ouagadougou on the docket. A win for the Stallions would have made things extremely interesting, but Egypt being Egypt would scrape a 0-0 draw, and that basically ended it. A win against Djibouti in Game 9 would clinch Egypt's 4th ever bid to the World Cup. That's still unreal. In North America, Egypt would be drawn into the best group they could have. Belgium is a very good team out of Pot 1, but not one of the superpowers they could have drawn. Then they got Iran out of Pot 3. I'm still not convinced they're even going to be here. And then New Zealand out of Pot 4, a very beatable opponent. There's a lot of questions about this Egyptian team, but there's no reason they can't get to from anywhere from 4 to 6 points to reach the knockout stage of the World Cup for the first time in their history. That was video number 26 of 48, a fun and bewildering one that should be so much longer. Who knows? By the end of 2026, maybe it will be. I don't know. I'm kind of skeptical they're going to go on that kind of run, but I don't know. I'm here for the Most Outlaw show. Tomorrow we're going to talk about Iran. I don't really know how to preface this or talk any more about it. It's just going to be a weird video. I'm not anti-Iran. I'm not going to try to push any kind of agenda. We're just going to talk about soccer and do our best to talk about one of the best teams out of Asia historically. Hope y'all keep sticking around. This series has been a lot of fun and a lot of work.